Most people never find anything in the woods worth stopping for. A deer print, a broken branch, maybe a hawk circling something dead in the tall grass. Dale Mercer had been hunting these 60 acres since he was 9 years old, and in all those years, the land had never once surprised him. Until the morning it did. He wasn't even hunting that day. Not really. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of cold that doesn't warn you. It just arrives sitting on your shoulders before you've even stepped off the porch. His truck had a cracked heater core, and his coffee had gone cold 20 minutes into the drive out to the property, and all he'd wanted was to check the old fence line on the east side where the deer had been pushing through and tearing up the wire. A maintenance run. Nothing more. The Callaway property, what everyone in Rutland County still called it, even though Dale had owned it for 11 years, was a wide stretch of old farmland gone mostly to brush and second-growth pine. There was a pond that froze solid every February, a creek that flooded in spring, and at the back of the property, with a tree line, met an old gravel road that nobody used anymore. There was a barn. It had been a working barn once. You could still see what it had been. The wide plank doors, the iron hinges, the hay loft up top with its single square window facing east. But the last animal that had lived in it was probably before Dale was born. He used it to store a rusted brush hog, 2 broken ATVs he kept meaning to fix, and enough old lumber to make a decent bonfire. He went in maybe twice a year. It smelled like dust and old wood and something faintly sweet he'd never been able to identify. He heard her before he saw her. He'd pushed open the big door, the one that dragged on the left side and required a specific two-handed lift and pull motion, and he was standing in the low gray light of the barn's interior, just letting his eyes adjust when he heard it. Not a sound exactly, more like the absence of sound, the way a space changes when something in it realizes it's been caught. Dale stood still. A barn has its own sounds. Mice in the walls, wine through the gaps, old wood settling. He knew all of it. What he heard was none of it. What he heard was breathing, shallow, controlled, trying to be nothing, coming from the hayloft above him. He didn't shout, didn't grab for anything. He just stood there in the cold half-light and looked up at the loft, at the rough ladder nailed to the wall, at the dark edge of the platform above. "Somebody up there?" he said, the way you'd say it to a stray dog. Quiet, not threatening, nothing. "I'm not going to do anything," he said, "just checking the barn. You can stay up there if you want." He meant it. He didn't know why, but he meant it. He turned and made a point of moving to the far side of the barn, crouching down near the brush hog like he was looking at something on the ground. Giving distance. Giving time. 3 minutes passed. Then, a face appeared at the edge of the loft. She was young. That was the first thing. Young enough that his brain immediately filed her under child. Not teenager, not person, just child, the category that triggers something old and automatic in most people. She had brown hair, tangled and dirty, falling forward around her face. Her eyes were the specific kind of wide that isn't curiosity. It's calculation. It's what eyes look like when they're trying to decide if something is safe. "Hi," Dale said, still crouched, still at distance. She didn't say anything. "How long have you been up there?" She swallowed. He could see it from across the barn. "Since yesterday," she said. Her voice was smaller than he expected. Rougher too. Dry, like she hadn't had water in a while. Dale was 53 years old. He had never been married. He had a brother in Tennessee he spoke to twice a year, a dog named Garrett who had died in March, and a habit of eating dinner at the same diner every Friday night where the waitress knew his order and never made him say it out loud. He was not, by any reasonable measure, someone who dealt with children. He didn't know what to say to them. He didn't know how to talk to them without feeling like he was doing it wrong. But he looked at this little girl, hair full of hay, eyes like a cornered thing, gripping the edge of that loft with both hands like it was the only solid surface she'd found in days, and something in him just went quiet. Not soft, quiet. The way you go quiet when you understand that whatever you say next matters. "Are you hungry?" he said. A pause. A very long pause for someone so small. "Yeah," she said. Dale had a granola bar in his jacket pocket. He bought a box of them at the gas station 2 weeks ago because they were on sale, and he'd been vaguely trying to eat better. He pulled it out, held it up where she could see it, and set it on the floor of the barn between them. Then he took 3 steps back. She watched him. He watched the granola bar. Neither of them moved for a moment. Then she came down the ladder, fast practice like she'd been doing it for days, and grabbed the bar without looking at him. She tore it open and ate half of it in 2 bites, then seemed to remember herself and stopped. She was looking at the floor. "What's your name?" Dale said. She glanced up. That calculating look again. "Rosie," she said. "Okay, Rosie." He didn't push for more. "I'm dead. This is my barn." She nodded. Like that was fair. Like she was acknowledging that she was the one in the wrong place. "You want to tell me what's going on?" he said. And here is where Rosie did something he would think about for months afterward. She didn't cry. She didn't look scared. She looked directly at him. This 53-year-old man she'd never seen before, standing in his cold barn on a Tuesday morning. And she made a decision about him. He could see it happen. Some internal verdict reached and filed away. She reached out and took his hand. Not grabbed, not clung, just took it. Slipped her small cold fingers into his, the way a child reaches for a hand they've decided they can trust. She was shaking. He could feel it running all the way up her arm. "Mama's hurt outside," she said. Dale had lived on this land long enough to know where outside meant. There was only one place someone coming through on foot would come from, the old gravel road behind the tree line. It was rutted and overgrown, and the county had stopped maintaining it before Dale had ever bought the property. People used it sometimes. Hunters who didn't want to ask permission. Teenagers who wanted somewhere to be. Once a few years back, a family had broken down out there and walked to his door in the dark, embarrassed and cold. He didn't let go of Rosie's hand. They went out the barn side door, the smaller one, into the tree line. She led him. He noticed that. She wasn't following him. She was leading him, pulling slightly ahead, knowing exactly where she was going. The trees were bare. Most of the leaves had come down already, and the ones that remained were the gray-brown kind that hold on out of stubbornness rather than life. The ground was hard underfoot, frosted at the edges near the creek. Their breath made clouds. She took him maybe 150 yards into the tree line, following a deer trail he would have missed on his own, and then stopped. There was a woman on the ground. She was leaning against the base of a big oak, sitting upright, but barely, her legs stretched out in front of her, and her head tipped back against the bark. She had a coat on. Not enough coat, not for this cold, a thin zip-up thing in dark green, and her hands were folded in her lap. Her face was the color of old wax. Her lips were dry and cracked. Dale went down on one knee in the leaves. Up close, he could see what Rosie had only said in that one sentence, in those 4 words, "Mama's hurt outside," with all the restraint and specificity of a child who had learned not to say more than necessary. Her left ankle was wrong. Even through the jeans, he could see the swelling, the way the fabric pulled. She'd wrapped it herself at some point. There were strips of fabric from somewhere, torn and wound around the joint in a way that was better than nothing and nowhere near enough. There was a cut on her temple, dried and dark. Her breathing was shallow, but steady. She opened her eyes. They were the same eyes as Rosie's. Same shape, same color, same calculation in them, but exhausted, running on empty. "Don't call anybody," she said. First words. Not "thank you," not "help me." Don't call anybody. Dale looked at her for a long moment. He looked back at Rosie, who was standing just behind him, still holding the other half of the granola bar, watching him with those measuring eyes. "Okay," he said. He didn't know why he said it. He would think about that later, too. The specific decision, it was the specific weight of it. But he looked at this woman on the ground who was clearly hurt and clearly afraid and clearly had very specific reason for that first sentence being what it was, and something told him that the most dangerous thing he could do right now was make her feel like she had no choice. "Okay," he said again. "Let's get you inside first." Her name was Claire. He didn't learn that for another hour, and only because Rosie said it by accident while they were getting her mother up the trail toward the barn. Rosie was holding Claire's hand on the left side, and Dale had his arm under her right shoulder, and Claire had said something about the ankle hurting, and Rosie had said, "I know, Mama, I know." Claire said to be brave, and then stopped, looked at him. He didn't react, just kept walking. The barn was not a house. He was aware of that, but it was out of the wind, and he had a space heater in the back corner near the ATVs that he used when he was working out here in cold weather, and he had a sleeping bag in the truck that he kept for deer season. He got all of it together while Claire sat against the old lumber pile with her leg extended, and Rosie crouched beside her, silent and watchful. He set up the heater, got the sleeping bag around Claire's shoulders, went to the truck, and came back with a water bottle and a second granola bar, a bag of beef jerky, and a small first aid kit he'd owned for 8 years and never opened. He cut the strips of fabric off Claire's ankle and looked at what was underneath. Bad, not broken. He didn't think he'd broken his own wrist once, and he had a sense of the specific wrongness of it, and this didn't feel the same. But badly sprained badly swollen, and she'd been on it for God knows how long. "How long have you been out there?" he said. "Since Sunday," Claire said. "It was Tuesday. 2 nights." He looked at Rosie. Rosie looked back at him. In that exchange was a whole conversation neither of them had out loud. That this little girl had spent 2 nights in a hayloft she'd found on her own, had kept herself quiet and hidden, had taken care of her mother as much as she could, and had waited. She had simply waited for something to change, with the particular patience of a child who has learned that waiting is sometimes the only safe action available. Dale wrapped the ankle properly, as best he could. He was no medic, but he was a man who had spent decades alone on land that didn't care about his problems, and he had learned to handle things himself. Clean it. Wrap it. Ice from the truck's cooler, wrapped in a rag. Claire didn't make a sound during any of it. She held Rosie's hand and watched Dale's hands and kept whatever was happening inside her completely contained. When he was done, he sat back on his heels. "You don't have to tell me anything," he said. "But I need to know one thing. Is someone looking for you? And is that someone I should be calling, or someone you're running from?" Claire looked at him. That same verdict-reaching look as her daughter. He was beginning to understand it was a family trait. "Running from," she said. Dale nodded. He guessed. Not because of any particular detail. The ankle, the cold, the barn, the don't call anybody. Not because of anything he could have named. Just the shape of it. The shape of 2 people in the woods in October with nothing but a thin coat and a child who'd learned to be very, very quiet. "All right," he said. He stood up and looked around the barn. Looked at the door. Looked at the window in the loft that faced east where the gravel road ran. "Nobody uses that road," he said, mostly to himself. Then, to Claire, "You came in from the county road end?" "Yes." "Then, whoever's looking will come from the same direction." He thought for a moment. "They won't know about this barn unless they've been on this property before." "Have they?" "No," Claire said. "Then you've got some time." He picked up his keys from where he'd set them on the lumber pile. "I'm going to drive into town. I'll be back in 40 minutes. I'll bring food and things for the ankle. If a truck comes down that road," he paused, "there's a door in the back of the barn, other side of the ATVs. It goes into the tree line. You take Rosie and you go. Don't wait." He looked at Rosie when he said it, not Claire. Rosie nodded. He was halfway to the barn door when Claire's voice stopped him. "Why are you doing this?" He thought about it honestly. He stood with his back to them, and he thought about it because it deserved a real answer and not a kind one. "Because you asked me not to call anyone," he said, "and you said it before you asked for any help. That tells me something." He pulled the door open. 40 minutes, he said. "I'll knock 3 times. He drove into town with the cracked heater blowing cold air on his feet, and he thought about the shape of a child's hand in his. How light it had been. How certain. She decided something about him before she'd even come down that ladder. He wasn't sure he deserved it. He was fairly sure he was going to try to anyway. The diner was on the way. He stopped, ordered enough food for 3 people, got it in bags without explaining anything to the waitress who knew his usual order, and looked at him sideways. Stopped at the pharmacy for a proper ankle brace, an ACE bandage, ibuprofen, antiseptic bandages, grabbed water bottles, and snacks at the gas station. He drove back out to the property. He parked, walked to the barn, knocked 3 times. There was a pause, and he understood the pause, understood what they were doing in that pause, whether to trust the sound, and then the bar on the inside scraped back. Rosie opened the door. She looked at the bags in his arms. She stepped back and let him in. That, he thought, was enough for today. Just that. The second day was harder than the first because the first day had been about survival. And survival is simple. You find what you need. You secure it. You breathe. There is nothing complicated about it because there is no room for complicated. But the second day was about staying. And staying is a different kind of work. Dale had not planned for any of this. He was clear-eyed about that. He was a practical man by nature and by necessity. 53 years of living alone on rural land will either make you practical or break you. And he understood driving out to the property on Wednesday morning with a bag of groceries and a thermos of coffee that he had made a choice the day before that had consequences. You don't set up a space heater and bring ibuprofen and knock 3 times on a barn door for people you're planning to hand over to someone else. He'd made his decision in the moment, and now the moment had grown into a second day. He was okay with that. What he wasn't sure about was whether Claire was okay with it. She was sitting up when he came in, her back against the lumber pile, the ankle brace he'd brought yesterday properly fitted, the sleeping bag over her shoulders. She looked marginally better, less like wax, more like a person, but her eyes were doing the same thing they'd been doing yesterday. Watching, calculating, tracking him the way a person tracks something they haven't fully categorized yet. Rosie was up in the loft. He heard her moving around up there and glanced up, and she was lying on her stomach at the edge, looking down at him with her chin in her hands. "Morning," she said. "Morning," he said back. He set the bag down and looked at Claire. "How's the ankle?" "Better than yesterday." A pause. "Thank you for the brace." He nodded. He pulled out the thermos and a cup he'd brought from home and poured coffee without asking and set it within her reach. She looked at it. She picked it up. He sat on an overturned bucket. He'd brought one of those too from the shed, and he looked at the floor for a moment, thinking. "You're going to have to tell me something," he said. "Not everything, but something. I'm not asking to know your business. I'm asking because I need to understand what I'm working with." Claire drank the coffee. She held the cup in both hands and looked somewhere past his shoulder. When she spoke, she didn't look at him. "My husband," she said. Just that. 2 words, sitting in the cold air of the barn. Dale waited. "We left 3 months ago," she said. "Rosie and me. We were in Hargrove. That's about 40 miles east of here. I had a cousin there. We were staying with her." She stopped. Started again. "He found us. 2 weeks ago. We had to leave fast. I thought we had more time." Her jaw tightened. "I was wrong." Dale turned the thermos in his hands. "He's been looking. He doesn't stop." Her voice was completely flat when she said it. Not angry. Not afraid. Just stating a fact the way you state gravity. That's the thing about him. He doesn't stop. From the loft, no sound. But Dale had learned already that Rosie's silence was not absence. She heard everything. She was the kind of child who had been trained by circumstance to take in information quietly and hold it. "The ankle," Dale said. "How'd it happen?" "Night before last. Coming through the tree line in the dark. I stepped into a hole." She almost smiled. "Not quite. Rosie heard me go down. She came back for me." A different expression crossed her face, then something complicated and painful and fierce. "She's 8 years old." Dale said nothing. There was nothing to say to that. Rosie came down the ladder eventually, the way she did everything. Efficient, undramatic, like she'd assessed the situation and decided it was within acceptable parameters. She sat next to her mother and ate the breakfast Dale had brought without being asked and watched him with those steady eyes. "Do you have any kids?" she asked. "No," Dale said. "Did you ever want them?" "Rosie," Claire said. "It's fine," Dale said. He considered the question honestly. "I don't know," he said to Rosie. "I didn't really think about it much. I was always busy with other things." Rosie considered this. "What things?" "The land, mostly. The property. Animals, before." He paused. "I had a dog." "What was his name?" "Garrett." Rosie nodded slowly, like she was filing this. "That's a people name. He was that kind of dog." Something shifted slightly in Rosie's face. Not a smile, not quite, but the leading edge of one. Like a door opening an inch to see who's there. Dale spent that morning working on the fence line he'd originally come out to fix, close enough to the barn that he could see anyone coming down the gravel road before they'd reach the building. It was something to do with his hands, and Dale had always thought better when his hands were busy. He thought about what Claire had said. He thought about the 40 miles and the cousin in Hargrove and the 2 weeks and the specific weight of the phrase, "he doesn't stop." He'd known men like that. Not personally, but he'd grown up in a county where that kind was not uncommon, and he'd known the shape of what they left behind. A certain quality of stillness in the people around them. A habit of watching doors. An 8-year-old who knew how to be very quiet. He fixed 3 sections of fence and came back at noon. That afternoon, Claire tried to stand up on the ankle. He saw it happen. He was sorting the first aid supplies when she put a hand on the lumber pile and pushed herself up and tried to put weight on it and went white. He was across the barn before she could go down, one hand on her elbow, steadying. She stiffened. He felt it happen. The way her whole body went taut at the contact, the way it wasn't just pain. He let go immediately. Stepped back. Gave distance. She stood on her own, breathing. Both hands on the lumber pile. "I need to be able to walk," she said. Her voice was controlled, but there was something rough underneath it. "We can't stay here forever. I need to be able to walk." "Not today," Dale said. He said it simply, not an argument. "You don't understand. You'll make it worse. Today you stay off it. Tomorrow we see." He paused. Running on a bad ankle is slower than not running at all. She looked at him. He was aware of Rosie in the corner, watching. Claire lowered herself back down. She said nothing, but she stopped arguing. That was the closest thing to trust they'd reached, and they both knew it. The thing Dale hadn't expected was what the quiet of those days would be like. He was a man accustomed to quiet. He lived alone. He ate alone. He drove 40 minutes to the diner on Friday nights in part because it was the only time all week he heard another human voice directed at him. He'd made his peace with quiet. He'd told himself, over the years, that he preferred it. Rosie changed that calculation. She didn't fill quiet the way most children did, with noise and motion and demand. She filled it with questions. Specific, considered, non-urgent questions, asked at intervals like she was conducting research she had plenty of time to complete. On Wednesday afternoon, while Dale was fixing a loose board on one of the ATVs for something to do, she came and sat on the other one and watched him work. "What's that tool?" she said, pointing. "Socket wrench." "What's it for?" "Bolts. Turning them. This one's seized up. Been seized up for about 2 years. Why didn't you fix it before?" "Because it didn't bother me enough until now." She thought about this. "Is that how you decide what to fix? By how much it bothers you?" Dale looked at her. "Pretty much." She watched him work. "My dad is the opposite. He fixes things whether they bother him or not. He fixes things that aren't even broken." A pause. "He likes fixing things." Dale kept his hands on a wrench. Said nothing. "He's not good at people, though," Rosie said. She said it with the directness of a child stating a weather observation. "Just the facts. He can fix everything except that." The bolt gave. Dale set the wrench down. He wanted to say something. He genuinely did not know what. "You're good at quiet," Rosie said. "Like, you don't fill it up with stuff. Most grown-ups fill it up. Is that good or bad?" he said. She tilted her head. "It depends on what kind of quiet it is." He looked at her for a moment. 8 years old. "That's a wise thing to say," he said. "I know," she said, completely without arrogance. Just acknowledging a fact. Thursday morning, the car came. Dale heard it before he saw it. The sound of tires on gravel, slow and deliberate, the sound of someone who was looking. He was outside checking the south fence when he heard it, and he moved, not running, fast walking, direct line back to the barn, focused. He knocked twice. Different knock from the 3. He told them Tuesday night. 3 knocks is me, 2 knocks is move. He heard movement inside, immediate. He went around the barn's east side, putting the building between himself and the road, and watched. A gray truck, moving slow down the gravel road. It stopped about 200 yards out. He could see it through the tree line, just the shape of it, and stayed there. Engine running. Dale stood still. The truck idled for a long time. Long enough that his jaw was aching from the cold by the time it finally moved again. It backed up, turned around, left. He stood there another 5 minutes, making sure. Then he went to the barn's back door and knocked 3 times. There was a long pause. Then the door opened. Rosie was standing in the doorway. She had a piece of wood in her hand, a short 2x4 she'd found somewhere, held at her side. He looked at the piece of wood. He didn't say anything about it. "Gray truck," he said. "Did you see his face?" Claire's voice from inside. Controlled. "No, too far. Just a truck." He stepped in. He didn't get out. Could have been checking the road. Could have been more than that. He left. Claire was standing. On the ankle, he could see it costing her. She had her arms crossed over her chest, and she was staring at the middle distance, working through something. "He knows we came east," she said. "Maybe. This road runs a long stretch. He could be checking all of them. He's thorough." That flat voice again. Gravity again. Dale looked at Rosie. She had lowered the piece of wood to her side, but hadn't put it down. She was watching her mother. "Come sit down," Dale said to Claire. Not a suggestion, not a command. Just said it like it was the obvious next thing. She sat. She was trying to hide how much the ankle had hated those 3 minutes of standing, but she wasn't succeeding. He sat on the bucket. "Okay," he said. "Tell me what you need." "Not right now. Not today. I mean in general. Where you need to get to, what you need to have when you get there. Tell me what the end of this looks like, and I'll work back from it." Claire looked at him. "Why?" she said. "Because you can't stay in my barn forever," he said. "And because that truck just drove down my road." She studied him. That verdict-reaching look, but different from the first time, less like deciding if he was safe, more like deciding if he was capable. It was almost harder to sit through. "I have a friend," she said, "in Millhaven. I know Millhaven. For hours west. She doesn't know I'm coming. I couldn't call. He checks my phone records." She said it without bitterness. "Just information. But if I can get there, she'll help us. She'll know what to do. You trust her?" "With everything." Dale nodded. "The ankle needs 2 more days. Maybe 3. He looked at her steadily. Can you hold 2 more days? Claire thought about it. She thought about the gray truck. She thought about whatever she'd left behind in the last 3 months, and the 3 months before that, and all the time before. Yes, she said. Rosie put the piece of wood down. She set it carefully against the wall, right next to where she'd been standing. Not thrown, not abandoned, positioned. Like she wanted to know where it was. Dale noticed. He didn't say anything about it. That night, after he'd driven home and eaten dinner and sat in his kitchen for a while in the specific quiet of a house that had been empty for a long time, he thought about that piece of wood. About an 8-year-old who'd found it in the back of a barn and held it like it was something. Not panicking, not crying, just finding what was available and deciding it was better than nothing. He thought about a child who'd learned that the available options were what mattered. Not the ideal ones, the available ones. He stared at his kitchen wall for a while. Then he got up and started making a plan. He was not a complicated man. He knew that about himself. He did not deal well in abstractions or in the kind of thinking that looped back on itself and produced nothing. He was better with concrete things, with fence posts and bolt threads and the specific angle of a frozen creek in a long winter. Give him a problem with edges, and he could work it. Give him something he could touch and measure, and he'd find a way. A woman with a bad ankle, a daughter, and a gray truck looking for them. That had edges. He got a piece of paper, and he wrote down what he knew and what he had and what it would take. He wrote it in plain language, the way he did everything. No drama, just logistics. He looked at what he'd written. It was going to take more than a barn and a space heater. He was starting to think that was okay. Outside, the wind had picked up, and the temperature was dropping again, pressing down on the county like a hand. For hours west, Millhaven sat at the edge of his knowing, a place he'd never had any particular reason to go. He'd have one now. 2 more days, he thought. Hold 2 more days. He folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket. He turned off the kitchen light. He slept, for the first time in months, without the specific loneliness that usually came when the house went dark. He didn't think too hard about what that meant. He just let it be what it was. Something had changed. He wasn't sure yet what to do with that. But it had changed. And in his experience, the first step to doing something right was just admitting honestly that something had shifted. Outside, the October dark pressed in all around the old farmland. And somewhere in his barn, 2 people were trying to hold 2 more days, and a gray truck was circling somewhere in the county like it had all the time in the world. It didn't, though. That was the thing he kept coming back to. Lying in the dark. It didn't have all the time in the world, because now it wasn't just the 2 of them anymore. The plan was simple. Simple plans are the only kind that work under pressure, because under pressure people revert to what they can hold in one hand. Dale had learned that from land and weather and the specific educational curriculum of being alone in hard places. You don't bring a map you can't fold in the dark. You don't build a route with more turns than you can remember in the 5 seconds before you need to take one. Get Claire mobile. Get them the truck. Drive to Millhaven. That was the whole plan. 3 steps, each one dependent on the last. Friday was day 3. He came out early, before light, earlier than he'd gone any of the other mornings, because the gray truck had been back Thursday night. He'd seen the headlights from his property's front gate when he'd driven out after dark to check. Parked on the road a quarter mile from the gravel turnoff, engine off, lights off. Just sitting. He'd sat on the far side of the road in his own truck with his lights off too, watching it for 20 minutes until it moved. He'd driven home with that feeling in his chest that he recognized from the one time a storm had come in faster than predicted, and he'd been in the open field with nowhere to go, a low, steady, physical awareness of a thing that was coming, and that would arrive whether he was ready or not. He knocked 3 times on the barn door at 5:45 in the morning. Rosie opened it. She was already dressed, which told him she hadn't slept much either. He was back last night, Dale said. He said it to both of them. Rosie was close enough that there was no point in trying to protect her from information she probably already knew. She was that kind of child, the kind who knows more than you think and handles it better than you expect. Claire was on her feet, both feet. He could see it cost her less today than it had yesterday. Not nothing, but less. She was working her jaw, processing. Where? She said. Road. Not on the property, but close. A silence. The truck, Rosie said. She was looking at Dale. You said 4 hours. 4 hours to Millhaven. Can we go today? Dale looked at Claire. Claire looked at her ankle. She took 3 careful steps, then 4, her hand not touching the wall, testing it. She stopped. She breathed. Yes, she said. They left at 7. Dale had backed the truck in when he first arrived, out of habit, and now he was grateful for that habit. The nose pointed out toward the main property road, not toward the gravel lane. If anyone was watching from the gravel road, they'd seen nothing except a truck parked in the ordinary way of someone who owned a property they worked. He loaded the truck before he'd gone in to get them, extra blanket in the back seat, the ankle brace and first aid kit in the door pocket, a bag of food, and water on the floor. He wasn't a man who believed in dramatic departures. You load what you need before you need it. You leave in the middle of a thing, not at the beginning or end of one. Claire and Rosie came out the side door of the barn. Claire walked to the truck herself. She didn't take his arm or the wall or anything. She walked on that ankle with her chin level and her eyes forward, and she opened the truck door and got in. Rosie went to the back seat, clicked her belt, and looked out the window like she was just a child going somewhere in the ordinary way of children who go places. Dale started the engine. He drove the main road out, not the gravel lane, down his long driveway, out onto the county road, and then a left, away from town, away from the most obvious direction. He'd mapped 3 different routes to Millhaven in his kitchen on Thursday night, each one with different roads, different levels of main highway. He went with the middle one, not the fastest, not the most obscure, the one that had the most options inside it if something changed. Nobody spoke for the first 20 minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The necessary kind. The kind that give a room, or a truck cab, space to settle. Claire had her face turned toward the window. Rosie was doing something he couldn't quite see in the rearview mirror. He kept his eyes on the road and his hands at 10 and 2, and he drove. Then Rosie said, "What did Garrett look like?" He glanced at her in the mirror. Brown, big ears, stupid face. "That's how all good dogs look," she said. "That's true." Another few miles. Did he know any tricks? He knew sit. He pretended not to know it when he didn't feel like it. Rosie processed this. "How long did you have him?" 9 years. "And he died in March." "In March." Pause. "That's hard." It was Dale said. He said it without any cushioning around it, because Rosie was the kind of person who deserved straight answers. Worst part of the year. He saw her nod in the mirror. Not the nod of a child trying to seem grown up. The nod of someone who genuinely understood what a 9-year absence felt like in a house. He thought about what her last 3 months had been like. Her last 3 years, maybe. He thought about what she'd had to understand in order to become the particular child she was. He kept his face straight and his eyes on the road. Claire's voice came from the passenger seat, quiet. She doesn't talk to most people like this. Dale didn't answer. He let it sit in the cab with them. "She decided something about you," Claire said. Still quiet. Somewhere between statement and question. "She told me her name?" Dale said. "First day. She didn't have to. She did it pretty fast." He saw Claire look at Rosie in the side mirror. Saw something move across her face. Then she turned back to the window. They stopped once, 2 hours out, at a gas station that wasn't on a main road. Dale had identified it on Thursday as a stop where you could pay cash at the pump, and the camera above the door covered only the entrance, not the parking. He filled up. Claire and Rosie waited in the truck. He didn't go inside. No gray trucks in the lot. No one looking. He got back in and drove. An hour outside Millhaven, Claire told him the rest. Not all of it. There was more than she was saying, and they both knew it. But she told him enough. The first time had been before Rosie was born. They'd left and come back, the way it went, the way the particular gravity of it worked on people, pulling them back into orbits that kept decaying. The second time she tried to go far, out of state, different name, new number, and he found her in 4 months. She'd stopped trying to understand how. Understanding the mechanism didn't change the fact of it. Rosie was 5, she said. When I finally, she stopped. Started again. When I finally understood that staying was the more dangerous choice. In the back seat, Rosie was looking at the window. Her face was perfectly still. "She's never said any of it to me," Claire said. Her voice was very careful. Not once. She was too little when it started, and then it was just normal. What she knew. "I think about that a lot." Dale said nothing. There was nothing useful to say about it, and he knew it. "I think about what normal she was building," Claire said. In her head, what she thought life was going to be like. The highway rolled out ahead of them. The trees on either side were bare and gray, the sky the low, even white of a November coming in early, and the road was nearly empty. "She built a better one," Dale said. Claire looked at him. "Normal," he said. "Whatever she thought it was going to be, she built a better one than she had. Piece by piece. She knew when to hide, and when to come down the ladder, and when to take somebody's hand." He paused. That's not what breaking produces. That's what building produces. Long silence. She chose you, Claire said. In that barn. She decided. I know. She's not wrong a lot. He glanced at her. About people, Claire said. She looked back at the road. She almost never gets it wrong about people. Millhaven was a small city that looked like it had been trying to become a medium city for about 30 years without quite making it. They drove through the main stretch of it, a line of shops and a diner and a laundromat and a hardware store, and then into a quieter neighborhood of older houses on wide lots with trees that had probably been planted by people who were now grandparents somewhere. Claire directed him. Left at the light, right at the church, 3 houses down. It was a white house. Porch wrapped around the front. A wind chime on the left post that was still going in the cold. A garden that had been put to bed for the winter, the beds covered and mulched and properly tended. Dale looked at the garden and thought that it told you something about the person inside. Claire was out of the truck before he'd fully stopped. Walking on her own, that jaw still level, up the porch steps. The door opened before she knocked. He saw from the truck, a woman in the doorway, older than Claire, dark hair going gray, and the specific expression on her face of someone who has been afraid for a long time and has just been given permission to stop. She didn't say anything. She pulled Claire in her arms and held her right there in the doorway, and Claire, who had not cried or broken or shown anything in 4 days, put her face into this woman's shoulder, and her whole body shook once hard like something releasing. Rosie was out of the truck and up the porch steps without Dale moving. She slipped into the hug from the side, wrapping both arms around her mother's waist, her face against Claire's back. Dale sat in the truck. He sat there for a long moment with his hands still on the wheel, looking at the 3 of them in the doorway of the White House, and he let himself feel the full shape of the last 4 days. The weight of them. The particular quality of having been useful in a way he hadn't known he was capable of. He opened the truck door. The woman in the doorway. She looked at him over Claire's shoulder with clear eyes, and an expression that was simultaneously guarded and grateful and asking a question he couldn't quite read. Claire pulled back from the hug. She turned. She looked at him standing at the end of the porch walk. "This is Dale," she said. The woman looked at him. "He found us," Claire said. Then, quietly, "He's good." The woman looked at him for another moment with those clear, measuring eyes. "Come inside," she said. Not to Claire. To Dale. Coming out of the cold. And he went up the porch steps and through the door, and the wind chime rang once behind him, clear and clean in the November air. Rosie was already in the kitchen. He could hear her asking questions. Something about the cat she'd apparently spotted immediately. A gray-striped one sitting on the refrigerator with the serene indifference of a cat that knows it is the household's actual authority. He heard the woman who owned the house, Sandra, he would learn, answer in the patient, interested voice of someone who has made a decision to be patient and interested. He stood in the hallway for a moment. The house smelled like coffee and something baking. There were books in every available space. A pair of small rain boots by the door, muddy from whatever the last rain had been, sitting next to a pair of large ones. Photographs on the wall. He didn't look closely, just took in the general warm density of them. The presence of a life lived forward, accumulated. Claire came to stand beside him. She didn't say anything for a moment. "I don't know how to," she started. "You don't have to," Dale said. She looked at him. "That's a very convenient thing to believe. It's what I think is true." From the kitchen, Rosie's voice. His name was Garrett, and he had big ears and a stupid face, and that's apparently the best kind. Sandra's voice, surprised into a laugh. "Well, he sounds wonderful." Dale looked at his feet. He cleared his throat. He was not a man given to anything that resembled visible emotion, and he was not going to become one now, standing in a hallway in Millhaven in his hunting jacket. He simply was not. He looked at Claire. "You've got some things to figure out from here," he said. "Legal things. You probably know that better than I do. There are people who help with that, organizations. Sandra might know. If she doesn't, it's findable." Claire nodded. "The ankle needs another week, maybe 2. Off it as much as you can." She nodded again. He looked toward the kitchen. At the sound of Rosie's voice, still going, still asking, still building a catalog of information about this new place, and the cat on the refrigerator, and whatever else she'd found to be curious about. "She's going to be fine," he said. He said it firmly, because he believed it. Claire made a small sound. He didn't look at her when she made it. "I know," she said. "I know she is." "She's," another small sound. "She's better than fine. She's better than I deserve." "That's not how it works," Dale said. He turned to look at her then. That's not how any of this works. Claire looked at him for a long moment with those tired, clear eyes. Okay, she said. He nodded. He should go. He knew he should go. The drive back was 4 hours, and the light was already doing what November light does in the afternoon, dropping faster than you expect. He had an empty house, and a cold heater, and a barn to close up properly. He had a life that was the same life it had been last Monday, except that it wasn't, and he was aware of that, but he wasn't going to stand in someone's hallway in Millhaven and think too hard about it. He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out the piece of paper with the plan written on it, the one that was now executed and done, and he held it for a second. He put it back in his pocket. Dale. He turned. Rosie was standing in the kitchen doorway. The gray cat was sitting behind her on the floor like a chaperone, regarding him with official suspicion. She says her name is Moose, Rosie said, indicating the cat. Which is the best name? That is a good name, Dale said. Rosie looked at him. Will you come back? She said. The kitchen behind her was warm and yellow-lit, and Sandra had gone somewhere inside it, giving them this. Claire, beside him, did not breathe. He looked at Rosie. She wasn't asking it dramatically. She wasn't asking with the wobbling chin of a child about to cry. She was asking it the way she asked everything, directly, with her full attention, prepared to accept the answer without performance. She had decided something about him in a barn on a Tuesday morning, and she was asking now if she had decided correctly. Dale crouched down, so he was at her level. Yes, he said. Her face did the thing. The door that had been open an inch opened the rest of the way. Okay, she said. Just that. Okay. Like they'd agreed to a reasonable and sensible arrangement. She went back into the kitchen. The cat gave Dale one more considered look and followed her. Dale stood up. He pulled his keys from his pocket. 4 hours, he said to Claire. She had her arms wrapped around herself. Her eyes were very bright. Drive safe, she said. He walked to the front door. He opened it. The cold came in, and the wind chime rang, the same clear note as before, and he went down the porch steps to his truck in the gray afternoon. He drove back through Millhaven and out the other side and onto the long highway that ran east toward home. The heater still blew cold on his feet. The coffee in the thermos was cold. The road was quiet with late afternoon and the particular emptiness of a weekday in November when most people are somewhere warm and inside, and he was out here alone. He didn't mind it. For the first time in a long time, he drove the empty road, and the quiet in the truck cab was just quiet. Not the other kind. Not the kind that sits next to you and makes itself known. Just quiet. He had Rosie's voice in his ear. Will you come back? And his own voice answering, and the absolute simplicity of that exchange. And he drove the 4 hours back to Rutland County with his hands steady at 10, and 2 while the November dark came around the edges of the sky. He pulled into his property just past 8. He sat in the truck for a moment with the engine off. He looked at the barn at the back of the property, barely visible in the dark. The shape of it against the tree line. The east window with its pale square of nothing. He thought about a child who had come down a ladder and taken his hand. He thought about the specific weight of it, how it had decided something, that small certain grip in his. He got out of the truck. He locked it. He walked to the house and opened the door and went inside. The house was empty. It had been empty for a long time, but he stood in it and he felt the difference between an empty house and a lonely one, and it was a real difference, a physical one, like the difference between a barn in winter and a barn where something lives. He put the piece of paper on the kitchen counter. He didn't throw it away. He'd figure out what that meant later. For now, it was enough to have done the thing. To have heard 3 knocks on a barn door and gone to find out who was there. To have crouched in the cold and held out a granola bar and taken 3 steps back. To have driven 4 hours with his hands at 10 and 2 and delivered 2 people to a White House with a wind chime and a cat named Moose and a woman in the doorway who knew what it meant when something that had been afraid finally wasn't. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He thought about Rosie at the top of that ladder, looking down, making her decision. He thought about being the thing someone looked at and decided was safe. It was not a feeling he'd known he'd been missing. He drank his coffee. Outside, the wind moved through the bare trees, and the October dark held everything, and the county went about the business of its long November night, and Dale Mercer sat in his kitchen and did not feel the particular company of the empty house, and that was different. That was different.